This is my video lesson plan. So I am going to be teaching Mariah, and I'm going to teach her about making a certain pasta dish. The pasta dish we'll be making is chicken Alfredo roll-ups. And the lesson kind of has three different parts. The first part is we're going to go to the store. I'm going to drive her to the store, and we are going to go through the store. I'm going to give her a list and how much and a budget. So a list and money, and she will need to go and pick out the different brands and the different kinds of things that we want to get. So she'll have to determine what's the best to buy. She'll have to determine between quality versus price and fit that all within the budget. And then we'll go and I'll have her purchase them. I'll go through the line with her, but I will have her do all the paying for and everything. So I'll have cash for that. And then we'll come back to my apartment and start making the pasta dish. I want to use my apartment because it has more of the feel of a college apartment. The kitchen's really small, and so I want it to give it the feel of more of a college type kitchen and atmosphere, because I want her to see what it's going to be like making food in college. That's part of the point of the lesson. And also a small space creates a little bit of state anxiety, just because there's so much going on. So that I think will be interesting to watch. It's a lot harder in my opinion, it's a lot harder to cook in a small kitchen than in a large one. So we're going to come back, make the dish, bake it in the oven and everything, and then we are going to go and give the dish to someone that she has chosen in her ward that needs a dinner. So we're gonna I'll drive her to that place, and we will make we will give the dinner to the person that she has chosen. That in my pre-assessment I had her I asked her to think about someone and to make observations in her ward and find someone that would be in need. So that's kind of social development, her thinking about other people and thinking about and observing them and noticing whether they need something, assessing need. So that's basically the three different parts. I'm going to go through the different concepts and how they apply to the lesson now. Okay, so Mariah is at Piaget's formal operational stage. So cognitively, that means that she is able to she has the capacity for abstract thought. So I think that's where discerning someone's need comes in. That's kind of an abstract concept, to think outside of yourself and to observe someone else and think, do they need help? Do they need my assistance? And also psychologically, she is starting to strive for autonomy in relation to family. So the ability to cook yourself a meal instead of having to rely on parents to feed you is a valuable thing for people of this age, I think. So she is also in Erickson's stages. She is in the identity versus role confusion. This lesson is going to help her out in her current stage because one of the things that in this stage people are trying to figure out is what roles they're going to play. So she needs to figure out what role in society and what role in her family and in her life that she's going to play. So one of the questions that she can ask herself is, do I enjoy cooking? Am I going to be the wife or the roommate that is going to cook all the time? Or am I just going to eat out? Or am I going to rely on other people to make me food and stuff like that? So that's kind of figuring out what role she's going to play. Will I enjoy cooking? And then going into the intimacy versus isolation, she is, it's all about relationships and figuring out whether you prefer intimacy or isolation. And so looking outside of yourself and figuring out someone's need is a big part of relationships and intimacy, and that will help her kind of develop in that area. So in her cognitive domain, one of the things that we're focusing on in the pasta making portion of the lesson is we're going to learn the science and on how to make a roux. And the roux will go into making the sauce for the dish. So her cognitive domain, that is the science of how a roux works and how it affects the sauce. That's also kind of an abstract concept, which fits into her Piaget stage. The affective domain is where that plays in is the emotional anxiety of serving someone in need and determining like, oh, did I get the right person? Am I doing this right? Do they really want my help? Just all the emotional anxiety that is involved in that. And that can also, trade anxiety can play a lot into that. Because if you have a lot of social anxiety already, then that emotional anxiety in the affective domain is going to be higher. So the psychomotor domain, that's just like her motor skills. The stirring and the coordination between keeping the roux moving and pouring the milk in, that takes some coordination. And so that will activate her psychomotor domain. There's going to be a lot of state anxiety in the kitchen just because we'll be cooking. We're going to do like a practice roux before we make the actual sauce. So I'll teach her how to make the roux, and then we'll make the actual roux with the sauce while we're also cooking the pasta and making the chicken. The pasta and the chicken, they just have to cook. So you put them in and then they can just sit there with little attention paid to them, but they still have to have some attention paid to them, and she's going to be thinking about doing the roux and the sauce while all of that is going on. So that's going to create some state anxiety. Making sure everything doesn't burn, and it's also a small space. So her physical what's the term? Her physical, well, I'll get to it on my list. Okay. And I'm hoping that state anxiety will be facilitating and not debilitating, and that it will help her to act quickly and be prepared with things, instead of, oh no, what do I need to do next? That anxiety will cause her to say, okay, I need to be prepared for the next thing so that things don't burn. Let's talk about defining features and characteristics of a roux. So the defining features of a roux are that it's a mixture of fat and flour, and it thickens. Its purpose is to thicken sauce, and it takes about 3 to 5 minutes to make. Those are the defining characteristics. Some correlational characteristics are that it's a whitish yellow color and it contains butter. Not all roux are that color, and not all roux have butter in them, but the one that we're making has those two things. So a positive instance of the roux would be our prototype, which is the white sauce light roux. And a light roux only cooks for a little bit, and so it's a positive instance, and it's used to make white sauce. Some more positive instances would be a light roux made with oil instead of butter, or a light roux made with fat instead of butter. And some negative instances would be a brown roux, which cooks longer and is used for gravy, instead of white sauce. And another negative instance would be a dark roux, and that's made for Cajun and Creole cooking, and it's the longest cooking roux that you make. So those are the negative and positive instances. So some misconceptions. She might have some misconceptions about what a roux is made of, because most commonly roux use flour and butter, but they can be made without butter. It's just some kind of fat. So she may think, for example, that an undergeneralization would be that a roux can only be made with butter, and that's an undergeneralization because it can be made with oil or lard or different things like that. An overgeneralization would be anything made with flour and butter has a roux in it, which is not true. Like, you make a cake, you use flour and butter, but it doesn't have a roux in it. Another misconception she might have is about the roux and adding liquid. A big part of making the sauce is after you make the roux with the butter and flour and you have a good roux, then you add liquid to start making a sauce. And a lot of people associate that liquid adding with that's the actual roux, but the liquid is not part of the roux. That's where you start going into making the actual sauce, and the roux just is the flour and the fat. So I'll be sure to clarify that. Let's see, the physical arrangement, that was the term that I was looking before. In order to lower the state anxiety a little bit, we're going to organize the ingredients and make everything fit in a small kitchen. So before we start, we're going to make sure and turn on the oven, and then we're going to take out all the ingredients that we need and put them on separate counter spaces and assign the counter spaces for the different parts. So this counter space will be where we're making the pasta. This counter space will be where we're making the kitchen. The chicken. This counter space will be where we're making the sauce. So we'll organize it that way, and then that will help in the physical arrangement to lower the state anxiety. The physical climate also may heighten the state anxiety because it's such a small kitchen that the oven will make it hot. It's summer and we don't have air conditioning in my apartment, so the oven being on will make it hot. So I will, in order to lower the anxiety because of the physical climate, I will open the windows and bring out a fan if we need that to make it a little cooler. Proximity is an interesting one because my kitchen is so small. So what I'm not going to stand next to her looking over her shoulder because that would cause anxiety in a 14-year-old girl. So I'm going to give her some space and watch her and then step in and help if she needs it. And that also involves her self-efficacy. I feel like if I step back, then and let her do stuff, then her self-efficacy will rise as she works, instead of me saying, oh, no, like, you have to do this, you have to do this. Let her figure some things out for herself. But I won't go so far as to leave her hanging so that her self-efficacy plummets and she just gives up. So whenever she makes a mistake, I'm going to ascertain her attribution theory. So I'll ask her if something doesn't work, or if it works really well, I'll make sure and ask her what she thinks happened, to ascertain that attribution theory, whether it's internal, external, stable, unstable, or controllable, uncontrollable. And going back to the social, we'll avoid learned helplessness by teaching her that even though we may not know what's going on with a person, we can still help them through the Spirit. The Spirit can tell us what to do to help a person and who to help, even though we may not know what's going on with them. Sometimes with a girl this age, she'll have a imaginary audience in the store, that people are looking at her and that the cashier's judging what she's buying, and that the people are thinking, oh my gosh, like, why are you buying all this food? So that would be her imaginary audience. As for personal theory, I will, before we start making a roux, I'll ask her how she thinks that sauces are made and see if she has a personal theory about that. I think that this activity is within her zone of proximal development because she doesn't know how to make a roux, and so that I'll help her to learn that. And also, I think that she will need some help with the service aspect and maybe also the ingredients. So this is not something that she could do on her own, but she will be able to do it with my help. This activity should require some assimilation on her part because she's already made pasta dishes before. In my pre-assessment, I found that out. So she'll be interpreting this new recipe into what she already knows about making pasta. For example, she'll know that you need to boil water in order to make pasta, but she may not have ever made lasagna noodles in pasta before, so that will be different than the typical pasta that you make. It takes a different amount of time, and so that's the assimilation is that she's interpreting the new recipe, and then accommodation in that she's changing how the new pasta, how much time it has to boil and things like that. That's the accommodation. So after she's done making the roux, we're going to review what the ingredients are and the steps of making the sauce, and then evaluate what level she's on in Bloom's taxonomy. So if she just has knowledge about it that she can only repeat, or if she has comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, or evaluation. So we will use Bloom's taxonomy to go over the sauce. So for my moral development, I'm going to text while driving, which I know is very common, but I think it's something that's still very important, that she knows as she's getting into the age where her peers are starting to drive, that she can have this courage to say, hey, that's not safe, you should stop. So I will text while driving, and then when we get there, I'll kind of turn to her and say, how did you like my driving? Or were you scared when I was texting? And we'll kind of go over that moral development that way. So there is going to be some positive transfer from her previous pasta dish making experience, and that will help with her assimilation. Her frontal lobe is going to be working as she remembers and tries to grasp how to keep whisking the roux while pouring in the liquid slowly. That'll be her frontal lobe. Her temporal lobe will be working as she hears a timer go off, or as she smells the garlic becoming fragrant, so it's time to move on to the next ingredient, or as she tastes the sauce or chicken to make sure it's good enough to put in the dish. That's her temporal lobe. Her occipital lobe will be working as she receives cues that things are ready, like the water's boiling, or the roux is simmering, or the chicken is burning. She'll receive those cues through her occipital lobe. Her parietal lobe will be working as she feels like how hot the stove is, or when we open the oven to put the dish in and take it out. She'll feel that rush of heat. That will be her parietal lobe working. And that's the concepts that I have so far. A lot of them will be applied as I'm reviewing the lesson, such as the different types of research and how her simplified memory system was working, and identifying memory errors and different things like that. But I hope that this lesson will help her have an understanding of how and why to purchase certain ingredients within a budget, and how to learn to cook a new recipe from a cookbook or a recipe book, and how to take a meal to someone in need, how to serve and discern someone that needs help. I want her to be able to find an unfamiliar recipe that looks appealing, and then purchase the ingredients and make the dish. That's kind of my end goal for her, so that she can learn how to be independent in her life as she's starting to be more on her own, being independent in cooking and just being able to feed herself. So that is that's my lesson plan.